在许多游戏中，故事的成分是相当重要的。然而，该怎么做才能将故事融入到游戏机制当中呢？我们这次很荣幸邀请到 11-bit Studios 的游戏总监，带我们深入探讨 Frostpunk 2冰封朋克2是如何透过游戏机制与叙事的巧妙结合，打造出强烈的情感体验。今天，他将分享管理游戏复杂度与故事清晰度的实务技巧，以及如何将重要的议题融入玩法设计，强化玩家的情感连结。Please welcome the game director at 11-bit Studios, Jakub Stokalski.
Hello. Do we have vision? Oh, it doesn't seem to. Let me reset it. Let's try again. It's very small. It used to be better. Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. It's really humbling to see the room so full. So thank you so much for taking the time to join this talk. I hope I will not disappoint, and I will actually speak something coherent for you to use in your own projects and in your own endeavors. And thank you once again to the organizer for inviting me all the way from distant Poland to visit you here. It's an honor. Okay, so the talk today is going to be about Frostpunk 2, but not only about Frostpunk 2, and it's going to be about speaking in systems. And I'll get to what that means in a second. But first, a bit of introductions, and maybe a bit of a show of hands that will help me to calibrate this talk a bit. Who here has played Frostpunk 1? All right, and Frostpunk 2? Awesome. Still a sizey amount of people. Perfect. So I will be referencing both games extensively. And even the second part of the talk will be somewhat of a, let's say, design postmortem on Frostpunk 2 a bit to illustrate the ideas that I will be talking about here. And just for those who have not played them, a quick introduction. Frostpunk 1 is a society survival game which blends genres of city building and survival that came out in 2018. I had the privilege of being the lead designer on that game. And it was a game about what you are capable of when pushed to the limit of trying to ensure a city that you run is trying to survive an icy apocalypse. The world has inexplicably frozen over in the late 19th century. And you are trying to build the last city on Earth around a heat-giving generator and surviving ever more colder temperatures. And Frostpunk 2 is, unsurprisingly, a sequel to Frostpunk 1, or really what maybe I should call not quite of a sequel to this game. Because what we set out to do when started making it is that at 11-bit Studios, our creative idea behind making the games that we make is to stay creatively brave. Is to try to push every project that we're doing in some form forward rather than just to rehash the things that we were doing, especially as we were doing the first sequel in, well, I think a good 10 years of the company's history, right? 11-bit Studios so far only did only one sequel before Frostpunk 2, and that was to a very, very early game called Anomaly from the very beginnings of the company. So we wanted to continue the story of Frostpunk 1 rather than just, add a bunch of more buildings, some new mechanics, and call it a day to Frostpunk 1. So in Frostpunk 1, you actually survived by the end of the game. Spoilers alert. But apologies, I can't make this talk work without them. By the end of the game, you survive the great storm that threatens the city, and you basically survive the end of the world. And to actually continue this story for Frostpunk 2, we asked ourselves, well, what happens after you survive the unsurvivable? Frostpunk 2 wants to show, that as the unifying terror of the apocalypse is gone, people start looking outward, making plans, having ambitions, envisioning better future for themselves. For some of them, the world being a blank slate is a perfect opportunity to try to build a utopia and only to succumb to the old demons of human nature. And this is exactly what the game we wanted to make about, right? Is that ultimately the danger is not in nature, but in human nature. And both games are systems-driven strategy games. Both games' USP is not in any one specific gameplay mechanic, but rather in the mood and the, generally speaking, narrative that it delivers. But it's not a narrative that you might get from purely story-driven game. I don't mean narrative in the sense of story that has been, pre-designed, pre-written by the designers or writers and then put into the game. It's rather by a narrative that emerges in a language that is unique to games as a medium. And this is what I personally, as a game designer and our whole team, is eager to explore for games in general, but specifically for the games that we make. And it's not a coincidence that Frostpunk 1 has been nominated to a BAFTA Awards for narrative specifically, even though it is a systems-driven strategy game without a single NPC. And FP2 was longlisted for social impact rather than any other general category of games. As you can see, these categories are not the usual ones you get for strategy games, but I truly believe this is not a coincidence because both games are systems-driven that do what they do well because they deliver a story through these systems, somewhat speaking through them, right? And this is what I want to talk about today. But also a bit of a game dev background to the game before we jump forward, in that Frostpunk 2 was also a very interesting and challenging project purely from a game development point of view. Frostpunk 1 was made on our proprietary engine called Liquid Engine by a team of around 30 to 60 people in peak. The proprietary engines have this quality that if you do not invest insurmountable amounts into them, they quickly become unwieldy if you are trying to do something efficiently, right? So that's why we tried making Liquid Engine 2.0 for the purpose of making our future set of games in the 11-bit studios. We failed, so we ultimately started working on Frostpunk 2 on Unity first, on the very first prototypes, but then ultimately made the decision to port all of our future games developed internally at the studio to Unreal Engine. So in a way, it was both making a sequel, a not sequel, a creatively challenging not sequel to a game while changing the game engine twice and growing the team from 60 to around 90 people. So it was quite a journey, I would say. But specifically to the merits of what we will be talking about today here there's basically generally 4 points that I want to talk about. First, I will try to give you a bit more background of where this whole speaking in systems idea comes from, and what's my thinking behind the merit of game design as looked at through this lens. Then I will try to make these and this will be somewhat philosophical, somewhat abstract, somewhat high concept, some psychology, some philosophy in it. But I will try to make it more concrete by showing you our approach to concept game design and narrative development, both from the very early stages and through how it takes shape in the actual game systems in the game itself, as evidenced in Frostpunk 2. And I will try to show throughout this how to translate this high concept into systemic narrative gameplay in a way that allows us to say specific things with gameplay itself rather than with the static elements of the game's game elements. And I will cap it out hopefully by exploring deeper and hopefully inspiring you a bit to think about what games can or cannot say for your own projects. Okay, so without further ado, what does really speak mean, right? Speak is to express thoughts, opinions, or feelings orally, but also to express feelings by other than verbal means, as for instance, actions speak louder than words. But if you think about it, what do we use speech in its general sense for? And by speech, I mean both, how we communicate with each other and how we communicate with each other through the things we make. The art that we make, the illustrations, the books that we write, the music that we make, etc., etc. This is really we could try to generalize it into that we are trying to convey meaning. And really this drive to convey meaning, what is my subjective experience, my lived subjective experience, and try to share it with my fellow human beings is very much ingrained in us evolutionarily, right? As a groups of humans started to come out of caves and started to, make their societies more organized, stories were ways for making meaning out of the chaos of the world around us, right? Trying to assign it meaning, trying to give it something that we can cling to and drive us forward in this quest to survive better and then achieve more. So this drive to have things that are meaningful in our operation is very innate and internal to us. And you might say, but wait, games are for fun, right? We're supposed to have just, a good time while interacting with them. And there is nothing wrong with that, obviously, but it's a similar thing to say that, books are for fun. And sure enough, some books are for fun. Not sure if you read the left one. I'm not sure if it's fun per se. I don't really like it myself. But on the other hand, it's definitely something that you just consume to enjoy it, right? To pass time. But on the other hand, there are books that are some of the most transformative experiences that you can have while consuming, culture and art in general. So making, defining a whole medium around a single concept such as fun, and a broad medium, as broad of a medium as games are, is, in my opinion, it's too limiting, right? So we can try to look at it through a different lens, and hopefully through a more, let's say, if not objective, then maybe more primal lens, in not focusing on what this art form and what this medium is for, but rather how it works. And one of the ways we could do that is through a lens of psychology, which is common to all of us as members of Homo sapiens, right? Is that all of us as human beings, we operate in the world while using a set of cognitive skills, right? And this is a set of things that is common to all of us in the functioning in the world around us, whether we read a book, play a game, go talk to a kid, or go to work. These are the skills, the tools that our brain has and capabilities that we use. And there is as with everything in psychology, there is no one definitive set, right? What I've shown here is just for illustration purposes, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. It's how easy for us is to perceive things, how efficient are we with our attention and changing our attention. Do we have a theory of mind of the people we come in contact with, so that we empathize and understand what's going on in their heads. Our language skills, our motor skills that we use in Twitch games extensively, for instance. So all of these different capabilities of us as human beings in operating in the world. So if we take that and and the usefulness of this concept is really the fact that this is agnostic to what medium we are talking about, right? We can look at how these cognitive skills operate while we are reading a book, playing a game, watching a movie, or reading a poem. So how about we do an exercise here, a quick exercise, and see how does playing a game compare to reading a poem. So let's take Doom. That seems like a good comparison, right? And from your reaction, I can imagine what you're thinking, and you will be right in that there are some pretty significant differences in how we use our cognitive skills while playing Doom as opposed to reading a poem, right? There is, our perception works completely differently, which is central in playing Doom, and obviously we need perception to read a poem, but it's just basically to follow along the letters, right? We do need attention and memory in both these cases to different extents, but we do need them both. But for instance, when reading a poem, there is no challenging using motor skills to speak of, right? We just turn the page, or not even that. Usually poems can get pretty short as well. While motor skills in Doom, well, good luck, right? If you do not have the Twitch skills to actually pull off the kill streaks. And this opposite is true for language, for example, right? You don't need much of language competence when playing Doom. You just need to understand your next objective, and that's it. And then you get to slaying demons. and with poem is obviously completely different. You will not have much use of reading a poem if you do not have high language skills. And well, I will not go through the whole list, right? But all of these red elements are where we differ, right? When we play Doom, we operate differently than when we read a poem, even though we are using in general the same set of cognitive skills. But we can ask, what happens if instead of Doom we examine a game like Dear Esther? Not sure if it's a pretty. I recently, when I made this presentation, realized that it's a pretty old game now. It's like, wow, time flies, right? So it's 2012, so it's like 13 years old. Wow. But it's one of these first games that pioneered this whole concept of walking simulators, which blew up and then died around the past 10 years. And it was a unique game. Anyone here played the restaurant understands? Right. So for those who have not played it, this is exactly a game when you mostly walk around an empty island and try to figure out what the hell is going on by reading text and listening to VO, right? And if you make the same comparison on these two elements of Dear Esther and versus reading a poem, while differences are still there, they are much less pronounced. Especially if your point of reference is playing Doom, right? You obviously walking around in a 3D environment, as in Dear Esther, is still a lot more challenging on your perception or motor skills than it is for reading a poem, but less so than it is for Doom, which lives or dies depending on that. And here it's just your basically method of navigation. But for instance, in both of these experiences, you do need language competence, right? Again, not to the same extent, but we will not make out a lot of Dear Esther's, what Dear Esther has to offer you if you do not follow along with your language competence, right? Or even theory of mind, like what's going on in these characters and these stories that are being presented to you. So in a way, we can summarize this by saying that playing Dear Esther is a lot like reading a poem. And my opinion on that, out of this exercise, is that there is really no qualitative difference in how we consume media as far as our cognitive capabilities go. And it's only the degrees to which we utilize them. And that means that there is no preconceived reason why we cannot make games about any other stuff that we can really think of, that other medias can do this. Because experiencing games create meaning in us, just like other media do. And we can strive to design this meaning consciously. And this is what me specifically, but also at other games at 11-bit studios, we are actively trying to do, is to try to design games that have meaning, that stay with you, that challenge you, not only in your motor skills exactly, but in your deeper layers of how you operate in the world. So obviously, the key here is how all of that operates between gameplay and narrative, right? And again, what I mean by narrative is not story. It's the player experience narrative that comes out of playing a game. The unique language of games is focused around gameplay, about choices that you make. One of the best definitions of games that I know of is by Bernard Suits from Grasshopper, which I highly encourage you to check out. It's a book from 1976, so pretty old one. But it's a definition that best encompasses what games are, and it's like the games are voluntarily overcoming unnecessary obstacles. And there is nothing in this definition that would preclude us from having a game about civilians in wartime, for instance, or challenges of an authoritarian leader, or slaying demons, for that matter, which is what we're good at. But this interplay between gameplay and narrative is crucial here. And if you think about it, what do we traditionally talk about when we talk about gameplay and narrative? We could map it out on these two axes, right? That gameplay, basically, when we design our mechanics, game systems, what you can and cannot do in a game, where we are basically designing the possibility space of the game, right? What is possible in this world that you're creating and what's impossible. And there are games where the possibility space is very small, right? Like yes, no, basically, or puzzle games where you just figure out a single answer to the puzzle and then you're done. And there are gameplay systems that have a very large possibility space. Like most strategy games, for instance, are built around this complex simulation of rules and objectives that have a very, very large possibility space. And I guess the most iconic example of that would be Go, the board game, which is, you know, an art form in and of itself, right? From a very simple rule set, you get a huge amount of outcomes in any one game. And the second axis here is the axis of the narrative. And obviously, again, not story, but narrative. And you can look at that through the lens of how much infused meaning you as game creators are defining for your game world, right? There are some purely abstract games like Tetris, which have very little infused meaning. And there are games that have very strict, very well-defined, and very that live and die by the meaning infused by it, like, you know, cinematic experience games, right? All of the linear shooters or Nathan Drake adventures and games like that, right? This is a huge selling point of those games, that they have very defined characters, very defined story, somewhat like in cinema or in novels. And we'll come back to this by the end of the talk, but I think it's very useful to think about it, that this is not a space, the space as defined by this graph, that is somehow not interconnected, right? We at 11-bit Studios, when we're making Frostpunk and Frostpunk 2, we arrived at, well, I don't know what to call it, maybe a motto, or I don't know, a saying that helps the growing team of designers to orient, in that gameplay really is narrative and narrative is gameplay. And there is no distinction between the two, because psychologically speaking, there is no difference in your subjective experience that you're having while playing the game. So it is useful to think about both gameplay and narrative as parts of the same space, rather than two separate disciplines that try to achieve their own goals within the project framework. And that is because the human brain, to simplify this all of this talk about the cognitive, you know, skills and whatever, is a perpetual meaning making machine that you cannot turn off. It will be trying to make sense of the world around you, whether you like it or not. Through everything that you see, that you interact with, all of that will, through this single psychological experience that you're having, will try to make meaning out of this. And it's worthy of note, because everything in your game that you're doing can either help or damage the meaning that you're trying to convey. And obviously there is nothing wrong with card meaning games. I've played them to death myself. But if we like to look at, if we are trying to look at how can we make a meaningful, aligned, coherent experience, then being conscious about this tug of war happening psychologically between all of these activities and how you frame them in the game is useful as game designers, right? So that you do not, well, obviously there is this whole school of game design that says, well, find the fun first, then go after what your prototype shows you, and there is obviously nothing wrong per se with this approach. It's just worthy of note that if you're doing only that, you might be missing parts of the picture that I'm talking about here. So let's take a look at an example of a very simple game on this three layers approach, somewhat borrowed from MDA framework. So on the mechanics layer, we can analyze any game by the nouns and verbs that we use. And we can, a useful check that I personally use is whether these nouns and verbs that the game offers me are somewhat coherent or not really, and what type of meaning they convey. So there's a game, like on the mechanics layer, I jump and move with the goal to find the princess. And the meaning I get from that experience is it feels good to win, right? It feels good to rescue the princess. And obviously, there is nothing wrong with that experience and with that specific meaning. It's been very successful and very pleasurable to interact with. But when we were designing Frostpunk 2, especially as I mentioned, as trying to do a continuation of a thought started in Frostpunk 1, then we tried to break this down on a more let's say, intentful way. So the verbs and nouns of the mechanics of Frostpunk, both 1 and 2, are I build, explore, research, and negotiate laws with the goal to make a city survive diverging ambitions that threaten to tear it apart. And hopefully the meaning you will get out of this is that because what will end us is not nature, it's human nature. That's pretty abstract, isn't it? It's like, what the hell? How do I make a game about that? It's, well, we figured it took us only 4 years to figure it out, so it's not. I wouldn't say it's especially easy, but I think it is worthwhile. And you know, the more general and in concrete your high-level story, the more work you will have to, and we had to do, to ensure that the actual stuff in here is not just words on a page, but these are actually things that you can play this, rather than just read or watch, you know, and feel good about yourself. And this gets complicated fast. You know, the game, all strategy games are complex. Frostpunk 2 is no difference. And it was important to keep whatever objectives appear in the system to be constructive to this larger story outline here. Another exercise that we did, and you could do too, is like obviously the tool of game pillars, right? When you define the direction for your game or the vision for your game, you use the tool of game pillars. And if you look at Frostpunk 2 and say what would the traditionally defined game pillars could be, well, it could be 3. For instance, one of them is city, which around them we build and manage and ensure survival of your city on this pure material layer. The other pillar could be society, which is managing and ensuring survival of the people inhabiting of the city. And the third pillar being the Frostland, the part about exploring the frozen world and expanding into it. And, you know, again, this would be true. Frostpunk 2 is about these pillars, very much so. But we never choose the easy way out. We like pain, and we like making things complicated for ourselves. So our game pillars worked more like this, right? So we wanted to make a game about building a future, but asking a question, for whom? So building a society at large scale, not just groups of, you know, dozens and hundreds, small hundreds of people as in Frostpunk 1, but we needed more scale. And we wanted to make game about ambitions that wake old demons. And that's being ideological motivations and consequences of those ideological motivations that they can have on the social fabric, on the city that you're managing. And ultimately, we wanted to make a game that is not about fighting nature, but about fighting human nature. We're saying that the ultimate enemy is internal. Again, as with the pillars, as with this MDA breakdown, very high concept stuff, right? A mumbo jumbo for some, even on our team. But for us, it was a key tool, right? For myself and Łukasz Juszczyk, who was the game co-director for Frostpunk 2, it was a key tool to maintain creative direction, because we wanted to make sure that the game has mechanics and building blocks that allow the player to play this stuff, not just read or watch it. So let's examine it in a bit more detail, right? Build a future, but for whom? So obviously I mentioned this, but we needed scale to tell a story about society growing in ambitions. Frostpunk 1 was a game where you start with around 60 people and grow to maybe 500, a good dozen buildings. It was a nice, contained city or base building experience. But it was not enough to try to show you ideological drift of a whole society groups if all we had to do to play with was hundreds of people, and neither the scale of time really, right? The Frostpunk 1 took place on the scale of days, and to properly show the ideological drift, the divergence of ideas and all of that stuff, we needed larger time scale. And with that came all of these changes to the core economy mechanics of the game itself, is to properly show this in not a, let's say, funny way, right? And not in a way that will be awkward. But no element was more crucial to showing this scale properly than the social system itself. So showing the people. to properly do justice to these pillars that I mentioned, we wanted to show how surviving the apocalypse shaped people into this new people of this new world, and what types of dreams they started dreaming, and how the people are changed by it. And this is a classic element that in a game you could treat as a narrative element, right? You can design this stuff if you want. So let's say we want different groups of people. We could go about designing them purely from the, let's say, cool factor point of view, right? Or what is interesting. But if we wanted to show the evolution of such a society and allow the player to play it rather than just see it, we needed it to be objects in the game world that the player interacts with and are designed systemically to reflect the ideological push and pull that will tell the story of a divided society. So we designed the Zeitgeist system. And so we went about designing from the bottom up, with the art and the framing for these communities was definitely there. But we started really from the systemic underpinnings. We went deep into research to try to figure out what are really the real world situation and use cases for different ideologies. How do they form? How do they evolve? How do they live, start, and die? And we went really far back in history. It was a huge amount of work did by mostly our narrative lead designer, Alex Borre, who was spending times in pandemic, fervently digging through books and history research, really, to try to figure this stuff out. Because we did not want to make something that is arbitrary. We wanted to make something that will be grounded, well grounded in stuff that actually happened, rather than the stuff that we just think is cool. And we ended up boiling this down to these. On the screenshot here, you have 4 axes, ideological axes with 2 extremes each. We ended up cutting one for production reasons. And obviously, these axes was just the starting point, because then we wanted to say, okay, so if we've got groups of people who have these ideas at heart, then who are they? So for each extreme of these 3 axes, we designed a base community who are people shaped by this idea through surviving the Great Storm, and now hold this experience close to their identity. So for example, we have foragers, who are groups of people who survived outside in the open frostland at extreme personal cost, adapting to the environment, not really having any technology to speak of to cling to. And this became their truth of survival, as opposed to machinists who had the exact opposite experience. They survived around the generators, thanks to the generators, and they very much hold it close to their heart that this is the only thing that allowed them to survive. So technological progress, machines, engineering expertise is of certain central importance to them. But obviously, these are just your regular quote-unquote people, shaped and touched by the apocalypse, but still somewhat open to other experiences. But we wanted to show ideological radicalism and how groups get radicalized and really taken by the idea, taken over by the idea. So we needed factions. And factions were groups of people who were well defined not only on one of these axes, as the base communities are, but are actually well defined on all of those, all 3 of those axes. So we did this because we wanted the story to be played not about a static group, right? We wanted it to be about people who, tempted by their inner demons, could radicalize into a folly that they have it all figured out. And, they will make New London great again, or whatever, right? So the fact that the factions radicalize and having, in this system, being defined on all 3 axes, illustrates and actually allows you to see systemic effect of that, high-level statement in the fact that these guys want things around them in a very specific way in all aspects of life, as opposed to base communities. Such as faith keepers, right, who survived in New London, so in Frostpunk 1, survived by the generator, so they revere it as the machine that allowed their survival. They are obviously religiously minded and see the society that they care for as a flock. So they want equality for everyone, and obviously driven by tradition, because the traditions and clinging to the religion that they allowed them to sustain hope through the worst is to them is central. And only after that came the visual design, came the narrative events, that specific narrative story beats that are connected to them. Because we wanted to make sure that whatever actions the player takes has gameplay interpretation on the mechanics of this ideological system, not just arbitrary this or that choice. And obviously, as is easy to count, having 3 axes with 2 extremes means we have 6 base communities, 8 factions, and that's a very shitty math that production team really doesn't like, and for good reasons. And suffice to say that at some point, as I showed you, we had 4 axes, and that meant 24 factions, and thankfully our production team talked sense into us with use of minimal violence. So it's unworkable. And that's also a factor that you need to take into as you're designing and building games. All right, and so let's move on to ambitions, waking all demons. All of that stuff was for the purpose of this being a playable game system rather than just a pre-designed statement. For instance, the idea tree, something that in regular strategy games you usually have some type of a tech tree. But we wanted to allow you to play the idea that what solutions you find to problems, what you think is thinkable and what is unthinkable, really depends on who you are and who you ask. So these are your basic gameplay strategy choices, right? Do I want to make my coal mine more technology focused or maybe more adaptive, smart, and whatever? And you use those choices to make progress in the game to scale up your economy. But by making sure that we integrate it with the core social systems, we ensure that the meaning of the choice that you make, do I side with the faith keepers, do I side with foragers, with machinists, is building up to these core themes and by extension to the core narrative of the game. And obviously the most system that embodies this the most probably is that allows you to play with these ideas is the council system. In Frostpunk 1, you had Book of Laws, where you could make arbitrary choices about the laws governing your city, and you are the captain, the authoritarian leader of the city, so no one really questioned what you did. They just reviewed, right? They reacted to what you did. But for Frostpunk 2, this is a society of post-British people, and they know that they want to have a say in how the city is run now that the apocalypse is gone. So they come back to the council system that now has you negotiating support of different groups in the city as you try to vote in different laws. And this naturally opens up a whole new layer of the game, which basically enables you to play the house of cards. Because what really happens is when you really need a law to pass, but you don't have the votes. But you promise something to another community that maybe does not really support it, but then you realize you can fulfill your promise, or you can build a lunatic asylum and declare the leaders insane, and you will not have to deliver on your promise. Or you send the secret police to infiltrate them. That is obviously if you first convince the council to give you these additional powers, and you can discredit them, and then you don't have to really worry about them, and you can move on. And as you can see, everything that I've said so far is pure gameplay. There is no scripted story behind these types of situations. But this is where I believe that the coherence of the game nouns and verbs that you use makes sure that all actually do tell a story without a single scripted behavior. And a story that builds up, the dark underpinnings about the pitfalls and dangers of society, trying to reinvent itself for the future, or something like that. And the last one, not nature, but human nature. So we needed to all of that somehow to build to a climax. All stories have climaxes. All stories are not flat, structures that have, similar level of emotional investment. They need variety and they need highs and lows to properly work. This is how our brains work. So let's take a look how this loop first, the game loop, works and how it is different to Frostpunk 1. Obviously, you've got your general game actions around research, which enables you to scale up your economy to the challenges of the game, which enable you to build more stuff or pass more laws. And you have to do all that because the weather is getting colder and you need to survive the cold. If you don't, you will die. This is the general gameplay loop of Frostpunk 1, and it is still very much present in Frostpunk 2. But if we wanted to expand this story into talking about how society works and how ideologies drive it, that we knew we already had this building block of communities and factions. And if we add that, then, and we add relations with those different factions, so systemic consequences of which ones do you support, what do you build, who do you negotiate with, who do you make good on, etc., then you get relations. And actually the big enemy to properly illustrate this internal conflict that is brewing and at the danger of blowing the city up is tension, which becomes the big boss, the big enemy of Frostpunk 2. So in a way, Frostpunk 2, systemically speaking, from this game flow graph, is an extension of Frostpunk 1 in this direction. But we could simplify it to talk about this climax a bit and collapse it back into a very simple form of we have game systems in general that allow us to survive, right, to continue playing and surmount the challenges of the game. And just for the purpose of not talking for 3 hours here, we traditionally design choices on this simple level so that they balance out within the confines of the game system. So for instance, I pay a little of resources for a chance of a small reward, or I pay a lot of resources for a chance for a big reward. Classic low risk, low rewards, high risk, high reward pattern, right? We find in games all around us. But all of this is closed within the game systems of the gameplay you're designing. So the rewards and the costs are both represented in the resources that you have in the game and the abilities and consequences that you have in the game of using this or that choices. But we can go beyond that by ensuring that consequences of your choices on the game systems relate not just to the mathematical balance of the game systems and numbers themselves, but they touch something deeper. So for us, it's important for all game choices to have consequences. And this is a key tonal element. Consequences are an indivisible element of player choice, right? There will be no choice without consequences, or rather no satisfying choice without consequences. Because without them, what's the point of choosing anyway? But what we found is that by making the content of your game touching on human values, rather than purely mathematical values, you can make players' moral outlook, players' human value set, a part of the game system itself. So the player may choose a clearly suboptimal solution, mathematically speaking, only because they agree with some other option more. So it has more value within the game system if we take into the game system the outlook and morality of the player themselves. So like in the example here, there's a lot of small words here, so I'll try to narrate it for you. To fight the crime in the city, in the idea tree, you could go as far down as to sterilizing criminals, to stop the rot from spreading. And remember, this is 19th, early 20th century reference point, so phrenology is a thing back then. So lots of really shady stuff. But then what follows is a question about what to do with their children if you did pass this phrenology law. And if they are the bad seed, do you sterilize them preemptively as well, make them secluded, brainwash them into upstanding citizens? Pretty hardcore stuff, right? And a lot of our players, including Mario 2065 here, seems to agree. And this part here highlighted is exactly that. Let me read it for you. I thought I was being humane, and instead I was casually breaking every single ethical boundary known to man. That was a complete left hook for me, and I instantly started a new game. it was a great payoff for this stuff, right? Mathematically speaking, crime was gone. But Mario here did not want to go through with it. They tried to find a different way through the challenge of the game, not because it was bad numbers that they got from the game, but it was a bad consequence, right? Touching on the stuff that he personally disagreed with. So we can extend this by saying, by implicating the players themselves, right? So, and by doing this skillfully, we can make sure that the players' morals are also part of both parts of this game system. And these values can be explicitly almost part of the game balance, right? That you design, and you design your trade-offs within the game, including the fact that it will be a morally charged choice to make. And this is how, in my opinion, meaning emerges through gameplay in large part, right? By having not just efficiency in mind within the game world, but actually implicating the players themselves. And nowhere was it more apparent when facing the big boss of the game. In Frostpunk 1, by the end of the main scenario, you had to survive the Great Storm. And we knew we needed some type of a great storm for Frostpunk 2, but this time a social one. When the factions of the city become so radical, so ideologically fervent that they fight each other and you risk destroying the whole city. So as you arrive at the ending of the game, there is a general three-way, it's not really a yes or no choice, right? It's a choice of strategy that you go into the last part of the game, and you actually have to play it, with using regular strategy game tools. And the relative difficulty of these options depend a lot on your playstyle until this point, right? You can banish the opposition, but if you try to play both sides throughout the game and the opposition faction is large, choosing to banish them might be very difficult. You can try to seek peace and negotiate peace between these two sides. And similarly, if you clearly favored one side up until that point, suddenly trying to seek peace with everyone will be quite challenging. And as there is a lot of things that you'd have to change in the setup of the laws of the city, both the laws, the buildings, to even start bringing both sides to the table. And ultimately, you can also become the captain and put everyone in their place, right? Enforce peace. But if you never made any stride towards authoritarianism throughout the playthrough so far, it will be very, very difficult to rush the laws that you need to get there as the city is burning around you. So this becomes a kind of a check against the player's playstyle so far. You can try to cheat, definitely, or even challenge yourself out of the playstyle that you favored until that point, but it's not going to be very easy. But what is more even interesting, as this ultimate systemic check on the player's values here, is that how the real-world distribution of these choices look like. We did do some telemetry on the game, mostly for game balance purpose, but looking at that was, well, I don't know what you think about this. I don't know what I think about it myself just yet, even though almost a year has passed. So what do you think the outcome here is going to be? Surprisingly, it was quite even, with a slight tilt towards becoming the captain and putting people in their place. But that was Asia, right? That was, generally speaking, the Asian part of the world. We also looked at Europe and the US. And for Europe, it surprised me, personally, because, this whole origin of democracy stuff and whatever doesn't seem to work. Right? I don't know. And it was even worse in North America, just a spoiler alert. So I don't know, right? Like I said, I leave it like that. I don't make any commentary because I'm a bit frightened myself and don't really know what to think about it. But this is the statistical outcome, right? This is a statistical outcome of your general strategy to use. But obviously, we wanted to make sure that we illustrate it not on this abstract layer of the huge, societal outcome, but also on the impact on individual people. The single named character in the game is Lily May here. She was born at the very beginning of your scenario, your playthrough, and by the end of it, she's a teenager. And your choice of strategy and how you solve this conflict touches her on a very deep layer. Here, in the conflict of Faithkeepers versus the Evolvers, their contrary faction, she was made to baptize. Her mother was sent to the colony as her faction was banished. She prays to stop dreaming of her every night, and in the future will bear 6 children to the high priest. Pretty bleak stuff. And of course, tonal choice here is key for the player to believe you. This is very bleak, and Frostpunk 2, in many ways, I believe, is even more bleak than Frostpunk 1, which was about braving this apocalypse. Here it's a lot thinner line to try to navigate this apocalypse of a different kind. And if you you're not careful about it, the players can get defensive or call bullshit on you, right? Call it a left hook, unearned, basically. And you know, when we design these things, it's easy to get caught up with, and I saw it a lot with more junior designers, right? It's very easy to get caught up with, like, oh, so let's kick the player even more, right? Let's make it even more bleak and make it even more depressing. Supposedly we make depression simulators at 11-bit studios. And, you know, but we make sure that this is never prescripted, that there is always a path, even a narrow one, that can avoid the oily darkness of the human soul, right? And that was true for Frostpunk 1, This War of Mine, and for Frostpunk 2 as well. And interestingly, this is subjective too, because post-release, we saw very, very different reactions to the game itself. And reading the game on this, let's say, cultural loop, right, of seeing how the game is being perceived and what people think about it on this very high-level, high-concept layer was common. We saw a lot of discussion about that, and really it surpassed our expectations. Some of the discussions about morality, what's acceptable, what's expected, really blew our minds with all of this, you know, whole essay on this, you know, personal ideological storms, etc. And of course, we should not assign it more than it is. We are making entertainment. It's worth remembering that. But as this shows, this example shows, if you make the effort to align the behavior of your systems, of the features that you're making, of the game mechanics that you're making, of the goals and how you frame them, in a way that is consistent with these highest levels of your theme, of your high concept you're trying to explore, you're actually creating a space for the players to perform a coherent set of actions that will be a coherent experience in their heads and therefore will form a coherent story that was fully of their own making. All we did was set the stage and the story was performed by the players. So the story was truly an emergent one. And there is really no limit about what this story can be about if we could pull off a game about, you know, this type of stuff. You know, mechanics are Legos and playing them with fun, but it can be other things. As both Frostpunk 1, Frostpunk 2 shows, and what started was This War of Mine, a game you might have heard about, a game about being a civilian in a besieged city in wartime, which is everything else but fun, and yet still quite engrossing. All right, so what are the key takeaways here? There are a couple, I would hope. If nothing else stays with you, is I would encourage you to try to see the games you're making through a different lens. The language of our medium is different from other storytelling media. And our brain is a universal and perpetual meaning-making machine that you will not turn off, no matter what you do. And that puts some burden on you to design the things you're designing consciously. And gameplay is narrative, is gameplay. And your nouns and verbs that you use in the design of your systems will tell a story, whether you like it or not. And you can try to design it consciously. You can try forming your concept in narrative terms and see how it transforms your pillars and core features. Although, be warned, this is a sometimes highly abstract and highly labyrinthine endeavor. And it's worth remembering that players' values can be a part of the game system. And that's how meaning emerges through gameplay. And last but not least, probably the most important of all of the key learnings, if you're making a game, try not to change your game engine twice. Really. All right. And just to cap this off, be back on this spectrum here, and why I personally think this is all worthwhile, right? Because we can look at all of this breadth of gaming as a medium, which is this beautiful spectrum of things that we can do in games, and there are games that have little infused meaning and small possibility space, which I like to call cognitive gyms, and there is nothing wrong with them, right? They're very engaging in their own right. And similarly, if we increase this possibility space and get games like RimWorld, Dwarf Fortress, etc., we get what I call anecdote generators, which is they form vignettes of stories which are very interesting, very unique, very wildly different to each other because of the size of their possibility space, but still pretty confined. And obviously, you get your cinematic experiences, which are, their commercial success speaks to their popularity. So there's, again, nothing wrong with them. But I personally think that this area here is where the unique strength of our medium lies. The brain, if we say that the brain is a meaning-making machine, then all actions we take string in our consciousness into a personal narrative which shapes us as human beings, really. These are our experiences, and they will shape us, whether we like it or not. And that's the power of stories, both in their linear form, because we can hear one by the fireplace, read or watch one, and the experience hangs around our subconscious, making us slightly different people by the stories that we heard. But think about what the power of games is in this context. It is different, using different means, but because we do not take those actions passively, but games allow us to actually live through something, psychologically speaking, right? There is no difference. And this puts, I think, both the opportunity and some type of responsibility on us as creators to do stuff that is worthwhile. And at the end of the day, I'm really, happy and proud that I got the blessing of being able to do these games, because we truly did manage to make a game about human nature, whatever that is, right? And about the fact that every utopia is someone else's dystopia, a game that touches on a lot of very complex stuff and still manages to remain largely playable. And to me, this proves there is really no limit to what stories can be told with games in this unique language. And, don't get me wrong, this is not a call to drop everything and do stuck-up philosophical social simulation games exploring dark depths of human psyche. You can do that, but you don't have to. But as a creative in this field, it feels encouraging to me that we work in a medium where we can make the games that we make about anything we want. And that means to me that games are truly worthwhile, and our role in them a responsible and important one. Thank you.
Okay, we still have time for one or two Q&A, so 我们可以现在进到我们的 Q&A 环节。那我们现在为了避免走道上拥挤，那我们这次把麦克风移到讲台上。那如果希望进行 Q&A 的话，请到台上依照工作人员的指示进行提问。请从舞台的左侧上台，谢谢。So just in case we have a very narrow space in the middle, so we're moving a microphone on the stage. So please take away.
Hello, 谢谢你精彩的演出。不好意思，我需要用中文提问。我想要问的是关于结果跟选择的问题。这套透过游戏体验来达到叙事手法的这个模式哦，我觉得会遇到一个问题，就是它需要玩家透过错误来得到经验，来进而判断正确的选择。但我对现在玩家有一个普遍的认识是，现在的玩家并没有这么大的耐心去达到 你期望的他做的一些事情，所以会导致说，就是可能会有一个情况发生，就是玩家他去玩了游戏，他可能尝试了几次，但他发现结果并不如他的预期，所以他就停止了这个游戏，然后去留下评价。他说这个游戏设计的太难了，他觉得非常困难，然后他觉得这是一个设计很糟糕的游戏，然后他因此而没有去完成你希望他看到的游戏的体验跟叙事。这个部分不知道您有什么样的看法
？Sorry.
Sorry. So
I'm sorry. Did not see. I was supposed to look here.
I think that I only remember the last one. So last one is or you can say that again. So the last part is if a player that try to work on these things, but finally find it's too hard to do and give up. So how can we do that?
Oh, sorry, I try to help. So he basically means that nowadays he observed a lot of the players, they are becoming less impatient. So with the systematic narrative things, so do you think that will be a possibility that the player doesn't be patient enough to go through all the narrative you designed?
Well, patience is. I think you're referring to the patience of the players, right? So the players, there's definitely a thing. There's actually reports showing that even though games are growing, strategy games specifically are flat, and that means that, relatively speaking, they are actually diminishing because, and a large part of that is attributed to this diminishing attention span, lack of ability to stay focused for long periods of time. So I would not say this is specifically tied to narrative themselves rather than to genre. Whenever you're making a game that is very complex, and most strategy games tend to be complex, you do risk a higher barrier of entry, which seems to be growing every year with that cultural shift. But it's still, Frostpunk 2 was still a real. A lot of players played it, right? It was a big success for us. I would not say that this is a killing factor, right? You really need to understand that this dynamic is there and try to make things as accessible as possible. But yes, this is basically comes with the choice of the territory of the genre, I think, right? That you have to contend with this.
Okay, the next one, please.
Hi, thank you for a good talk. I have a question, I guess, more about like your team and how you work with your team. Because I know we covered a lot of like what the lexicon and language of these sort of like systems are. But if I were like a new or middle level designer joining your team, how would you open that book for them and get them to kind of learn your systems and your design systems? I can't imagine everyone reads Infinite Jest when they join your team. So like, yeah, what are the sort of strategies there to get people onboarded? So thank you.
Well, onboarding is, thankfully we have our design team and in general development team has a lot of people who are with the company for a long time. So, and it's, we grew, Frostpunk 2 was 90 people, so it was already a lot. But it did not happen like this, right? It was a gradual shift. So we did manage a lot of this knowledge transfer by osmosis. But I do not think this is a repeatable process, basically. In short, we got lucky. So if we were to make this a bespoke system that makes sure to actually teach explicitly these concepts to the game design team, then we would probably need some, like the way I would go about it is actually design something that is long form. Like first make sure that we have still some people who are along with us long enough to teach them on the job, basically. But then at every review, and this is what I have been doing, right? Every 2 weeks we have a review. Every review, I try to comment on things and give feedback on things, both on the low level stuff, but aligning this with this whole concept that you heard here, right? Is that it's not so that it's not just in my head, but people regularly hear this type of thinking in the feedback, so that hopefully over time they internalize it, right?
Okay, let's do one last QA. So yeah, it's okay.
Thanks for your sharing. So, Dzień dobry. Okay, so that means a good day. So, okay. For me, I feel like this world of mine, Frostpunk, you guys are Poland is the only reasonable country that can make this kind of games, because you guys got a very aggressive neighbors from east and west, and also from your history. So I was thinking creating this kind of narrative attached games, how deep you should connect to or attach to the culture or your history when you have design challenges or you have confusion. How often you go back to observe your history or culture, or you can nurture from your backgrounds. How does that work? Or you think you should be more detached to it and give yourself a more flexibility to rethink? Thank you.
Sure. Well, I definitely don't. I think there is very real value in creating from the point of view where you are. So drawing from your culture, drawing from your personal experiences. This is the only really place where you can draw authentic inspiration from. That's not to say that you don't, like, the research that I mentioned was all around the world, right? We try to make sure that we go out of our bubble, right? And try to make something that is representative. But there is no running away from, this is my opinion, there is no running away from the fact that as creators, you are who you are. And this is not a bad thing, this is a strength, actually. You know, there's this saying, like, I think it was Ubisoft saying that their games are not political and whatever. I think that's a mistake, right? I think games should be political, and this is the only point of view of making something that is worthwhile, right?
Okay, this concludes the session of this lecture, and thank you again, Jakub, for bringing us such a wonderful speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.